Hello, America. Thanks for joining us again. Public Figure Facebook page today. My name is Jared, and we're taking your comments on the Facebook page. Ryan Bundy is joining us this afternoon. He wants to talk to you about the militia in the history of this country. Ryan, where would you like to begin, sir?
Well, I understand that there was a question brought forth in trial by the members of the jury, and they asked, if a militia was legal in all states. I don't have the exact dialogue there in front of me, and so I would like to answer that question because, and maybe before we try to answer that question, I thought maybe we'd talk a little bit about what a militia is, so that people understand. I think there's a big misconception in America as to militia. It's become a word that's an idea that people are scared of, and I don't understand where that's coming from exactly, besides, maybe from around the world. We see ISIS, we see these other organizations, we see down in Mexico where they've got cartels, and I think they're associating these things as militias when that's not necessarily correct. And so, why don't we talk about what a militia is to begin with?
All right.
And I've done a bunch of study recently where I went through different law dictionaries. I went through the Black's Law dictionaries. I went through Ballantyne's dictionary. I did a bunch of study looking it up in different case laws from previous Supreme Court case, Ninth Circuit court cases, and many other court cases. I looked into the United States Code, and I found much. I found a lot. I looked up different categories. I looked up militia, militiamen, volunteer militia, organized militia, unorganized militia.
This call is from an inmate facility.
State militia, National Guard, regular enlisted militia, reserve militia. There's a lot of study. And then you can even go from that into the term of posse comitatus. And there's a whole bunch more on that. And it's very closely related and nearly the same thing as militia.
That's what I've explained to people, Ryan. There's two natural checks against overreach and tyranny, and that is the governor and the state militia and the sheriff and his posse, the community force.
Correct. Okay, and that would be the difference, between militia and posse comitatus. But I want to define militia, just plain and simple, without getting into all the different categories of what type. Just militia. And this is coming out of Black's Law. It says militia, a body of armed citizens trained to military duty who may be called out of certain cases but may not be kept in service in times of peace. And I want to correct myself. That didn't come out of Black's Law. That came out of Ballantyne's Law Dictionary. Okay, so a militia is a body of armed citizens, trained armed citizens. Now, I want to go directly to the United States Code, and this is found in United States Code, Title 10, Chapter 12, subsection 246, and it says the composition and classes of militia. It says, A, the militia of the United States consists of all able-bodied males, at least 17 years of age, and except as provided in Section 313, which I could go to that in a minute, under the age of 45 years, who are and who have made declaration of intention to become citizens of the United States, and of female citizens of the United States who are members of the National Guard. Okay, so in essence, the militia is every able-bodied man between the age of 17 and 45. If you're a male between the age of 17 and 45, then you belong to the militia, whether you realize it or not. You are a militiaman. Okay? And so the question, back to the question of the jury asked, are militias legal? Well, yeah. it's not. They're legal, and you belong to one, most likely. There are some exceptions. If you get into Section 247, it lists the exceptions of those who are not required to belong to a militia. Now, one is, there's a little bit of a list there. Interestingly, one is those who work for the Postal Service. And I believe that might be for the reason that they want to keep communication moving no matter what happens. And so a postman cannot be called, does not belong to the militia. Now, this United States Code, Title 10, Chapter 12, subsection 246, talks about different classes of militia. And I think this is really important because this is also a major confusion, because a lot of people believe that, well, the militia is the National Guard, and so that's that. No, according to United States Code, there's two classes of militia. One is the organized militia, which consists of the National Guard and the naval militia. All right? And the second category of militia is the unorganized militia, which consists of the members of the militia who are not members of the National Guard or naval forces. So, in other words, everybody else, back to the all able-bodied males. So if you are an able-bodied male between the ages of 17 and 45, and you're not in the National Guard or the naval militia, then you are a militiaman. You do belong to the unorganized militia. And the exception, it mentioned that exception, except provided in section
from an inmate facility.
313. Now, I don't have it right before me, but I have read it. I do remember it. And it takes the age up all the way to 65 or 68 or something like that. So in other words, you're still a militiaman up to the age of, say, 65. I don't have it exactly in front of me. And so I think that that's the biggest misconception. People do not understand what a militia is. People do not understand that they belong to the militia. Now, I want to, going further with that definition, is where a lot of these court cases come in. Because through the narrative of what took place in the courts, we get a greater understanding of what is the militia and who is the militia. United States versus Miller. It says, we explained that the militia comprises all males physically capable of acting in concert for the common defense. I'm just thumbing through here, so give me a minute as I kind of thumb through.
Oh, no problem. In the beginning, every able-bodied man was counted on to help defend their respective colony. You had Indians, you had pirates, you had all kinds of whatever. Everybody was prepared to defend their neighborhood. And the Founding Fathers feared a standing army. They did not want a military junta ever taking over these United States. And the Constitution provides for a navy, but the army needs to be reauthorized every 2 years, which is why the National Defense Authorization Act, Congress zips that right through every 2 years to keep the army built up and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But the army was always supposed to be subject to as needed. Militias should make up most of this country's defense forces. Every state acting under the governor has their own state defense force. And with the passage of the Dick Act and other things, little by little, the federal government has taken over everything, including the National Guard. Nowadays, the National Guard gets sent everywhere but their own borders, and certainly that's...
I want to go into this a little bit later in the discussion, so I'm going to mention it here, but I don't want to talk about it yet.
Okay.
But let's think about this for just a second. We call this the Utah National Guard, or the Nevada National Guard, or the Idaho National Guard. Well, what nation is that guard supposed to be protecting? The Utah National Guard is supposed to protect the nation of Utah. Okay, now that might sound strange to people's ears. The nation of Utah? What? What do you mean? Okay, now I'm going to drop that right now. I'm going to drop that on a rock. I want you guys to just keep that in the back of your mind. Let's keep going with militia, and we'll come back to the nation of Utah or the nation of this or that in a bit. Okay, I want to go into some more of these court cases. Let's go into the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. I don't have the actual name of the case. I've got the case citing number, but it was decided April 5th, 2004, so it's not very old. It says, today the United States Code still defines the term militia, the modern statute, instead of narrowing the militia to an organized body of regular, supervised, and trained part-time soldiers. It broadens the term. The statute specifies that the militia consists not only of the organized militia, consisting of the National Guard and Naval Militia, but also the unorganized militia. The unorganized militia is an amorphous body of the people as a whole. Now, instead of being limited to white male citizens between 18 and 45, the militia has, of course, no racial restrictions. Non-citizens are now included, provided they have declared an intention to become citizens. The sex restriction is gone, and the females are included if they are members of the National Guard. People become part of the militia now at age 17 instead of 18. The only narrowing of the statutory scope is that we are no longer required by law to own and furnish guns, ammunition, and bayonets. So now the militia consists not only of all white male citizens between 18 and 45, but also of all able-bodied non-white.
It's from an inmate facility.
Whether citizens or non-citizens declared for citizenship between 17 and 45. All females in the National Guard, those of who are...
You have 1 minute remaining.
Those of us who are male, able-bodied, have almost all been militiamen for most of our lives, whether we know it or not, whether we are organized or not, whether our state government supervise or our possession or use of firearms or not.
Okay, Ryan.
I'll hang up and call back.
3 minutes, ladies and gentlemen. Join us right back here. Put your comments down there, and back with Ryan Bundy in a minute. Welcome back, America. You're listening to we're talking to political prisoner Ryan Bundy from his maximum security cell in Pahrump, Nevada. Father of 8, great friend of humanity, cowboy. Anything else you'd like to add to your list of great titles, Ryan?
Well, I could embellish, but we'll leave it at that for now. My mind's upon militias, so.
Let's get back to it.
All right. Reading further from that same United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit case, it goes on to say that the Supreme Court concluded that the militia referred to by the Second Amendment was neither an organized fighting force nor a formal state military entity. And it's quoting the history and legislation of the colonies and the states. It says the sentiment at the time strongly disfavored standing armies. The common view was that adequate defense of country and laws could be secured through the militia, civilians primarily, soldiers upon occasion. In the words of the court, the militia comprises all males physically capable of acting in concert for the common defense, a body of citizens enrolled for military discipline. All right, I want to go to another court case. This is Silveria versus Lockyer, and it's a 2003 case. Again, not very old. It says a whole bunch of the same stuff at the beginning. I'm going to go down further in the case here, and it quotes. By the way, it lists the same United States Code in here, 10 U.S.C. Chapter 12, 246. And it says, thus, as used in law, the meaning of the word has not changed significantly, other than to grow more inclusive. It is, as always has been, emphatically the case that militia members do not have to be organized in a collective state service, because the statute provides expressly for the existence of an unorganized militia members of the members of the National Guard are in the organized militia, and those not in the National Guard are in the unorganized militia. The various classes of persons are exempt from militia service, most notably the organized fighting force, as the panel would put it, who are active members of the armed forces. Thus, soldiers, as we now use the term, are generally not in the militia, and the rest of us are. Far from being an organized collective functioning as a fighting force, the militia is like the jury pool, consisting of the people, limited like the jury pool to those capable of performing the service for which militias or jury pools are established. The militia is indeed the people, as individuals and not as an organized collective body. And the Second Amendment expressly prohibits government from disarming the people. That says it pretty darn clear and straight. That's all I can say.
No argument there.
Okay.
So what happened to our militias? Little by little, they've been usurped, gobbled up, put out of business.
Not so. We're here. We're alive. We're the people. We're the militia. Start acting like it. Start training. Start arming yourself, because that's what is intended. Okay, I want to go directly to the United States Constitution a little bit. Of course, we know the Second Amendment states that a well-regulated militia is necessary to the security of a free state. Okay? So, it's not just legal, but it's necessary. And that's not just talking about the state, the Utah state or the Nevada state or whatever. It's talking about the state of freedom. To maintain freedom, a militia is necessary. And it's necessary that the people, and what is the militia? As we just went through the description, it is nothing more than the people, the whole of the people, the all able-bodied men. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, so that they may stand in defense and act as in a concert in the status of militia. Now, our founding fathers understood that a militia was necessary. But I want to go to Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15 of the United States
Call is from an inmate facility.
Now, herein, we the people are granting Congress certain powers. In Section 8, it says, Congress shall have power to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrection, and repel invasions. Okay, so if we're giving Congress the power to call forth the militia, they can't call something forth unless it already exists. The militia it was understood that the militia exists, and we're only allowing Congress to call it forth. We're not allowing them authority to organize it, to
regulate it.
And actually in 16, I'll go in there just a little bit. But my point is that it already exists. Congress could call it forth at certain times and for certain purposes. Okay? Now I want to go into Article 1, Section 8, Clause 16, and we also give Congress the power to organize, arm, and discipline the militia for governing such part of them. Now that's key there, part of them, because Congress isn't going to call the whole militia. They're just only going to call a part of them. So we're giving them authority to organize, arm, and discipline that part of them, which is called forth, just the part of them. The rest of them stay home. The rest of them are still the militias in the states. Okay? So just part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States. Okay? But even then, we reserve to the states respectively the appointment of the officers, the authority of training the militia according to the discipline prescribed by Congress. Now I want to go to Article 2, Clause 2, or Article 2, Section 2, Clause 1. Now, Article 2 of the Constitution is the powers we're giving to the President. Article 1 is powers we're giving to Congress. So now we're changing branches of government here, but we, the people, are still in charge. We're still the ones that are telling government what they can do, and now we're going to tell the President what he can do with the militia. Article 2, Section 2, Clause 1. The President shall be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States, and of the militia of the several states when, there's another key word right there, when called into the actual service of the United States. All right, so now if that be true, then the corollary is also true. When they are not called into actual service of the United States, the President is not their Commander-in-Chief. He is only the Commander-in-Chief of that part of them that are called into actual service when they are in actual service. The rest of the time, they are not under the authority of Congress, nor under the command of the President.
Works for me.
So the militia exists. Our founding fathers understood that. They understood that it was necessary for the security of the free state. They did not. They leaned against standing armies. And when we were in need of defense, we would call forth the militia who already existed, who were already well trained, who were already well armed, because that's America. That's the American way. That is. And now I want to go through this just a little bit. Okay, let's talk about our individual rights. We do understand that government has no authority in and of itself. That's important to understand who the sovereignty is. The sovereign is the one with the final say, the one with the authority. In a kingdom, the king is the sovereign. What he says goes. But in a republic, it's we the people. And our Constitution lays that out in the very first words. It states the authority. The very first words of the preamble, it says, "We the people." I'm trying to get to it here, but we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for, another key word, for the United States of America. Okay, this Constitution is not this is not the Constitution of the United States of America. People need to quit saying that. Of means belonging to. This Constitution does not belong to the United States. This Constitution is for the United States of America. Okay? And so that's a distinction that people need to understand, that this Constitution belongs to the people, and it's for the governing of the government. And back again, we the people are the sovereign. We the people have authority. So we only delegate some of our authority to government so that they may accomplish the purposes of securing our freedom,
Yes.
securing our general welfare.
And those powers are enumerated while every state was guaranteed a Republican form of government.
Yes, yes. And that is important to understand the difference between a monarchy or an oligarchy or a democracy or a republic. We were guaranteed a republic form of government. We are not a democracy. We are not an oligarchy. All right, so I have 6 questions here, and I want you to answer them. And I want you to answer them on behalf of all of our listeners, or all of America, so to speak. So, 1. Does a man have right to defend himself?
Yes. Natural law. Animals do too. Anything in existence.
That's one of the most basic, if not the most basic, natural law. You have the right to defend.
This call is from an inmate facility.
Okay, 2. Does he have the right to defend his family?
Yes.
Okay. Does his wife have right to help in that defense?
Of course.
Okay, what about his son?
Yes.
What about his neighbors? Do they have right to help him in his defense?
Yes.
And does this man have the right to help defend his neighbors or help them in their defense?
Yes, he does have that right, and some would say it's his duty.
Okay, yeah, that's correct. This is the very essence of militia. This is the very essence of what a militia is and its purpose. Self-defense and the defense of your neighbors and loved ones, your family. Militia is nothing more than every able-bodied man in that community. For a militia to be effective, it must be trained, it must be armed. Militia groups formed to train is very appropriate and necessary to the security of the freedom of the community and to maintain a state of freedom. And so to answer the question the jury asked, is a militia legal? Absolutely. Absolutely. It's most fundamental. It's one of the fundamental principles of this nation, of this country, that a militia is legal, it is proper, it is necessary, it is appropriate, and the members should be armed, and they should be well trained. And if they break off into groups so that they can do that training, it is absolutely appropriate. And
That's what well regulated means.
Well regulated does not mean well controlled. Does not mean well under the thumb of the government authority. It's well trained. Well trained.
Everybody's arms equipped and ready. Everything's in order. You don't want anybody out of shape. You don't want anybody's arms dusty. And yes.
So, do we have any questions coming from your listeners?
A lot of support. What would you suggest? Well, who knows what's going to happen in this court? That nobody's allowed to talk. At least the good guys aren't allowed to talk. The jury. I wish if everybody on the jury were like you, Ryan, we wouldn't have any problems in this country. Not very many.
Well,
you got to know your rights. You got to know what's going on.
Well, on that note, one of our founders stated that this form of government was intended for a righteous and moral people, and is wholly inadequate for any other, and also that you cannot expect to be ignorant and be free, for you expect something that never was and never will be. And so if we don't understand who we are, what our rights are, who the sovereign is, what a state is, and like I said, we'll go back into that in a minute here, what a state is, and what a militia is. And the other thing is you only have what rights you're willing to fight for. Okay? Again, a right is not given or granted by government. Some rights are
from an inmate facility,
inherited or given by God, but other rights are created by claiming them, and that's important. You got to claim it. If you don't claim your right, then it doesn't exist. You've got to use it. If you don't use it, then it doesn't exist, and you've got to defend it. And if you don't defend it, it will be taken away. It will not exist. And so for any right to be a right, you must claim it. You must use it. You must defend it. You can't expect people just to honor it on its own. Now, granted, they should, and that comes down into, common decency and the most basic fundamental law upon the world is to do unto others as you would have others do unto you. To love God and to love yourself as your neighbor, which is basically saying the same thing. To do no harm, which is basically saying the same thing. In other words, that golden rule can be said in many different ways, but it's still all the same thing. And all other laws hang upon that. There are those that will not obey that, and therefore you must defend. You must defend your rights. And if you don't, then you let them go.
Yep, and they'll be gone. They'll be gone forever. A good example of that, I think, after the war between the states, the powers that be really started to clamp down on the militias during Reconstruction when
1 minute remaining.
All right, right back here with Ryan Bundy, ladies and gentlemen. He's going to talk about the militia and Reconstruction and the Civil War and what happened to the militia your great-granddaddy participated in. Back in a minute. And we're back, ladies and gentlemen of the jury and others in the court of public opinion. Ryan Bundy is here, political prisoner, and it's time that he goes home. He's talking about the militia, because in court last week, one of the members of the jury asked the government, "Is a militia legal?" And I think they took a minute and looked at each other and came back and said, "No." But Ryan is here to teach us about this. And of course the militia is legal. It's right in the Constitution. After Reconstruction, militias in the South in the 1860s kind of got out of hand by those who wanted to take control of things. And since then, we don't see them drilling in the street anymore. Ryan, why is that?
Well, I believe that the definition of a state has been forgotten. And a large part of that reason could be that Reconstruction. President Lincoln said, "Preserve the Union, preserve the Union." Well, in that same sentence, in that same word, he was saying, "Destroy the states, destroy the states." And to a large degree, that has happened. And so I would like to talk about what a state is and help people to realize what we still are or quite frankly, what we need to return to, and which is the crux of this entire case that we're in. Now, I'm going to go back into the history. I want to go into the Declaration of Independence because we see a transformation take place there. We see a transformation. So the definition of a state and the definition of a nation is the same thing. A nation is a state is a nation. If you look up the definitions and really study it, and granted, there's usually more than one definition for every word in the English language, we've learned that. But when we get into the proper definition of those, a nation is a state is a nation. But a colony is something different, okay? A colony is a subdivision, is an extension of, is a subordinate to something that's greater. And this is what our founding fathers were tired of. They were tired of being under that thumb, an only extension of. And so in the last paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, they say here, and I'm going to start about in the middle of the paragraph, it says, that these United States are, and of right ought to be, independent states. So they recognize that they are not states, but they ought to be. And then in the very next line, they create themselves as states. They say, and that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, and I want to reiterate that he's saying states, plural.
This call is from an inmate facility.
They have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states, plural, may of right and ought to do. Okay, so in essence, this declaration is where states were actually created here in America. Before they were colonies, the transition takes place in this declaration. Now they are independent, free and independent states, not United States. They are independent states. Each one of them separately and independently has the full power to levy war, to conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right to do. Okay, so now of course, Great Britain's like, no, your colonies, we're going to smack you around because we're not going to allow you to be states. And so the war ensued. And the war was won by the states. Now, interestingly enough, the actual peace treaty that was signed to officially end the war for independence is called the Treaty of Paris, because it was first signed in Paris, but was eventually signed by 14 states. 14 states. So I asked the question, tell me if you can answer this. Who were the 14 states that signed that Treaty of Paris, the peace treaty?
I don't know. Unless, I'm intrigued, please.
Okay, well, the obvious would be the 13
colonies.
States. Yeah, but they're not colonies anymore.
Right,
states.
right,
okay?
Right.
All right, so 13 there. But the 14th was the state of Great Britain. Okay, let that sink in for a second. Because now, you realize that the state of Great Britain was the most powerful state in the world at that time. They had an empire that spanned the globe. The sun never set on the British Empire.
Facility.
And yet they're referred to as a state, the state of Great Britain. Okay? And now all of a sudden we have 13 new states that through war just proved their independence, and now they're claiming equal status in the world with the greatest state of the world. And they all sign equally on the same docket, proving that they are equal in standing of the world. The document wasn't signed by two, the United States of America and Great Britain. No, it was signed by each and every state because they were independent.
Yes, yes.
So therein is the definition of a state. The characteristics which each of the original states possessed at the time of independence is how a state is defined. That's the definition of a state. Okay? So now we call ourselves the United States of America, the United States. What is a union? And what is a union? A union is made up of several independent entities, okay? Like a marriage between a man and wife. We got two people here, and they have joined through the union of matrimony for a common cause and purpose to build a family, to have a home together, and there's several purposes there included. But they are still two separate people. They are a union. They haven't morphed into one body. They haven't become one. They are one, yes, in their common cause and purposes, but they're still two separate people. Thus it is with the United States. We have united for common cause and purposes, which are outlined in the Constitution for the United States. That's the parameters of the Union. If it's not within the Constitution, then in those other things they are not united. They are separate and independent, and possess all the characteristics of the original 13 states. And that goes into the equal footing doctrine. In fact, Federalists, let's see, where they have them right. I think the Federalist 45, Federalist 46. Anyway, there's some there that talk about the importance of new states coming into the Union being equal with the original states. And if they're not, they say that they will surely revolt because, let me see if I can find it here, by the way. I wouldn't mind just reading that.
They wanted the same protections and advantages as the others.
Yes, but they wanted to be equal in every way, not just some ways. And that's a here, let me get to it here.
And and you guys have discussed that a lot over the last year and a half, because the way the West was treated, they came into the Union later, but they still have the right to the same privileges and advantages, all things being equal.
Well,
in theory, I mean, that was supposed to be the plan.
If there's any condition, see, that's what's happened with some of these Western states is Congress placed conditions upon the states upon entering statehood and being admitted into the Union. Well, that creates an inequality. The early states, I'm talking not the original, but the early newly formed states, there were no conditions required to become admitted into the Union. They were entered in upon complete equal footing and had all the rights, privileges, and possessed the same characteristics as the original 13 states. And that was supposed to be maintained throughout. That was the standard. That was the precedent set for the establishment of new and formation of new states and the acceptance of them into the Union. And interestingly enough, Nevada, which was formed and admitted into the Union on October 31st.
This call is from an inmate facility.
1846, President Lincoln was the president at the time, and in his speech accepting Nevada in twice in his speech, he stated that Nevada was entered in upon equal footing in all regards. And so, I guess while we're on that subject, let's talk about some of those characteristics. So let's talk about the original 13 states. Let me ask you another question. After the War for Independence, how much of the land in each of the states did Great Britain retain? How much ownership of the land did Great Britain retain in each state after the war?
None.
None. Are you sure about that?
Pretty sure.
Pretty sure. You're right. Pretty darn sure. It would be ridiculous for us to think that Great Britain retained 1 square inch of that land. In other words, each state independently owned, her state and her people, by the way, owned 100% of the land within the boundaries of that state. Okay? And so that's one of the characteristics that a state has, is it has the full and uninhibited ownership and control of that land within their state. So newly formed states have that same characteristic. And as new states were formed across the United States, this is the case. Now, we formed the Constitution of the United States, and we give Congress certain authority, certain power, certain duties, and we knew that Congress would need some land to carry out those functions. We couldn't just leave them high and dry with all these duties to do and no means of accomplishing them. That would just be ridiculous of us. And so we, the people, said, first of all,
This Congress call is from an inmate facility.
We'll give you a place to call home. We'll give you the District of Columbia. We didn't call it District of Columbia, but at that time, but it was, we gave them a 10-mile square. But we also knew that they would need a little bit more land to carry out the other functions. But these lands belong to the states. And we couldn't force them to give it up. If you notice, let's go to Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. This is the place where we're granting some land to Congress. And it says, Congress shall have power to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district not exceeding 10 miles square, as may by, now this is important here, because they're basically asking the particular states from where this land is going to be taken from, as may by cession of the particular states and the acceptance of Congress become the seat of government of the United States. All right, it says as may, by cession. Cession means to give. They're going to cede it over. So did those states from where that 10-mile square come from? Yeah, they said, okay, we will allow that to happen. We will give cession to that. And so it took place. Now, we knew that they were going to need a little bit more land. That land belonged within the boundaries of the states. We can't force the states to give up their land. And so we're going to give Congress, I'm going to keep on reading here, and to exercise like authority over all places purchased by the consent of the legislatures of the states in which the same shall be, for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. So any other land that Congress is going to be able to own, they've got to get consent from the state legislature of the state where it is, and they can only use it for the purposes which were outlined in the Constitution, which they say those, the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings.
And they have to pay for it.
They have to pay for it. It says right there, purchase, places purchased by consent.
So 84% of Nevada isn't one big giant military installation that they bought way back turn of the century.
No. So in other words, it's not constitutional, and it's not legal. It's illegal. It just doesn't fit.
It's occupied.
It's occupied. Unless they follow the supreme law of the land and went through that process, then the federal government does not own it. Nor in the state of Idaho, Utah, or any other state in the union. It doesn't matter which one.
Nope. All of these states are occupied.
Gotcha. So back to our National Guard. The National Guard, by the definition of state is a nation is a state. Okay, and we see that. In fact, we're hearing it in the news right now. We've been hearing, the state of North Korea and the state of, I haven't been hearing it myself. I've been hearing others talk about it. But in the news, we're hearing that these two states ought to get together and work out this problem before it becomes full-on war. Have you been hearing anything of the sort in the news?
Oh, yes. Similar things. Yep.
But my point is they're using that terminology for North Korea. Are they not, the word state?
Yep, because that's what it is.
All right. So that lends further to my dialogue here today, that a nation is a state. A state is...
You have 1 minute remaining.
And so the state of Idaho, where you're at, has its National Guard to defend the nation of Idaho. And which nation belongs to the Union and is one of the states of America that happens to be joined in union for common cause and purposes. All right, I'll hang up and we'll come back.
All right, back in 3 minutes. 50 separate republics. Texas isn't the only one. Back in 3 minutes with Ryan Bundy. Join us. And we're back, America. We're speaking with political prisoner Ryan Bundy. And there's others. There's so many people like you, Ryan. And this trial in Nevada, this, I guess you would call this double jeopardy because they're being tried again for the same things. And this is the biggest news in the country. This is the big game. It's not a game. This is a fight. And everybody should be paying attention. And everybody should be there, because what happens to you guys will happen to the rest of us. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I would. I think that a lot rides on this case. A lot. Our freedom as an American people rides on this case, and I think many realize that.
You're stuck in a courtroom where your lawyer, if it's the public defender, how does the judge make the rules on what you can say and what you can't say, and who you can look at and who you can call to testify for your defense, which is nobody? How does this happen? It happens because there are guys with guns running the whole show. The standing army is there.
Because they've got a monopoly on the force, is what it is. A monopoly on the force. And see, that's not what our founding fathers intended, because of their standing armies, their marshals, their BLM, all these people whom are standing armies. That's the definition of standing army, which we're not supposed to have in the United States of America. But because of that, they have a monopoly on force, and that's exactly why they hate the idea of a militia or a posse comitatus, is because that breaks up that monopoly.
Yes, it's the natural check. It's the natural enemy to tyranny is a sheriff and his posse, or the governor and the state militia, the state defense forces. Every state can defend itself. And when you have 50 states independently able to protect themselves, liberty's probably going to be maintained as long as the virtue of the people is there and everybody believes all rights should be protected. But in this jury, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to point out that
This
if you
was
recall,
from an inmate facility.
on April 12, 2014, when my father was on the stage there with Sheriff Gillespie, my father never asked for the cattle back. What did he ask? He asked two things of the sheriff, two things only. Neither one of them included return of the cattle. What did he ask? Do you recall?
Yep. He wanted the sheriff to disarm the Forest Service and drive the invader off his property.
All right. Well,
pretty close.
The one was right.
No.
Pretty close. And the key point there is disarm the Forest Service, and he meant the BLM, and quite frankly, he meant the bureaucracies. Why? Because they do not have jurisdictional authority to possess those arms. They do not have they do not have constitutional authority to be a standing army. Who is the law enforcement within the county? It's the county sheriff. And so by those other entities being there in an entity of force, they were subverting the authority of the sheriff. So more or less my dad was saying, take back your own authority, sheriff. Go disarm them, because they don't have the authority to be there and do what they're doing. You do. Go do your job.
Yep.
And he also warned, not necessarily then, but later on, that if the sheriffs don't go and disarm the bureaucracies, that they're going to come against us in a greater force, and we're going to have to face those guns later. And that's already begun. Lavoie is dead because of that.
Yes. He's 100% right.
I have a bullet in my shoulder, and how many bullets went into that truck? How many other men and women do they kill across this country?
Many that we don't even know about, because they don't have the network that you guys have built up. As for the truck hasn't been released yet, right?
No.
So government's hiding the no, that truck will probably disappear. Lavoie's truck will be gone because people would want to see it, and they would want to know how many bullet holes are in the truck. And there you go.
Well, I can tell you, because I was present in that truck, there are going to be more bullet holes in there than what they have reported being shot.
I think everybody will believe you on that.
Okay.
How do we...
All right,
okay.
Back to juries. The juries have also got out of hand because our founding fathers... I want to point this out. Most people don't pick up on this. But the rights that are enumerated in the Bill of Rights or Bill of Prohibitions, whatever you want to call them, the first 10 amendments, are not the only rights that we possess. In fact, I really like the 9th Amendment because the 9th Amendment makes that clear. It states that the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others by the people. In other words, we didn't list them all. We only listed a few here. And so we have many other rights that are not numbered. That's what enumeration means. We didn't number them all. We didn't list them all. Okay? But they were listing some of them that were most important in their minds, that they were really concerned about. Okay? They listed those. Now, of the first 10, half of them have to do, either directly or indirectly, with how a person who is accused of crime is to be treated. To me, that's amazing, that they were so concerned about people being accused of crimes that we've got to specifically list those rights so that they are taken care of.
Yes.
So that they are not abused.
Yep. The Constitution was organized and constructed to prevent the exact thing that is happening today to you and everybody else.
Correct. Okay, now, but in part of there was the right to a speedy trial by an impartial jury. Now, a jury is supposed to be 12 men. And to be convicted, you've got to convince all 12 men that beyond a reasonable doubt that a crime took place, that he's truly guilty. So guilt can only be determined by a full unanimous jury of 12 men. It takes all 12 to convict, but it only takes one to acquit. Only one to acquit. Now that's where juries have gone askew in these latter days, because now the judges are saying, no, it takes 12 to acquit also. No. And they're calling that a hung jury when they don't get all 12. It's not supposed to be that way. If you can't convince 12 men that you're guilty, then you're not guilty. That was the protection provided. That's why the jury is 12. That's why the jury is 12. Those men that were acquitted, which the judge mistakenly called a hung jury, they were acquitted in that first trial.
Yes.
And this is double jeopardy by sending them through a trial again.
Yes.
And this is not what the founding fathers intended for juries to be.
No, that hung jury idea only serves the courts and the prison system.
It only serves the courts. And yet the protections are supposed to be there for the accused. And every one of them is being violated on us. That's why we're still here in jail instead of being treated as though we're innocent until proven guilty. That's why, you're supposed to have the right to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in your favor. And yet the judge is blocking all their witnesses. And I can go on and on. I can spend another hour or two just on that subject. But we've been on for quite a while, and maybe it's time to come to an end to our call. But
all right. What would you have America do? I'm sure. Come to Nevada. This is where it's at. Come to Nevada.
Well, Whether you come to Nevada or not, I will leave that to your own discretion. I wouldn't know what to tell you to do when you got here. But if the Spirit of the Lord tells you to come, then come. I always tell people that the first thing they need to do is to analyze their own lives. Find the sin in your life and repent. This form of government is only adequate for a righteous and moral people. It is wholly inadequate for the governing of any other. If you cannot make your choices to where you live righteously, then this government will not work. So first, make amends to your Maker and to anyone you've done wrong. Get right with the Lord. Get your soul right. And then listen to the Spirit of the Lord and follow Him in your actions. These men who came to protect us in 2014, that's what happened with them. They felt the Spirit of the Lord, and they acted without hesitation, and they came almost on a moment's notice. We didn't invite them. We didn't know them. I didn't get to know these men until I was in prison with them in November. 2 years later or whatever. I didn't know them at the time.
No, they were the Good Samaritans. They came.
They were just good Americans.
Yeah, they came, they helped out, then they went home, and they weren't asking for anything.
They weren't asking for anything.
That's an amazing insight.
And, I hear story and story over again by the others that were there. They said, I came. I don't know why. I felt I had to. Many of them felt the Spirit of the Lord and didn't know. They don't understand. They didn't even recognize that it was the Spirit of the Lord because they might not have known Him as well as they thought. They might not have been religious, whatever the case might be, but everyone who came because they felt that Spirit and they acted. And so I'm asking people to learn to recognize that and follow that Spirit. I can't tell you what to do. You're going to have to listen to the Lord, okay? But the one thing I can encourage you to do is to keep learning, understand the principles of liberty, the principles of freedom. That I will tell you that free agency, to be an agent unto yourself, to have the ability, the right to choose for yourself how you will act, is the most fundamental principle of heaven. Okay? I believe that that's part of the purpose which we're sent to this earth, and it's imperative to our eternal salvation. So that's my religious bit put into here. That this is not just important for us here and now. This has eternal consequences. Be on the Lord's side. Who's on the Lord's side who? Now is the time to show. And I ask it fearlessly. Who's on the Lord's side who?
Thank you, Ryan.
In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen. Say amen, America, if you agree. If you can make it to Nevada, show up. You are witnessing history one way or another. This court will set the precedent for everything else to take away your rights going down the road. So figure it out. Ryan, we'll talk again.
Thank you for listening. Goodbye.
All right. Judge Navarro is open for business again, 9 a.m. Monday in Las Vegas. Be there.